So last week we were compared to sheep and shepherds, and this week Jesus uses the illustration of a plant, specifically a vine. I have one of my vines that grows everywhere that I put up there for you all to see. Jesus is the true vine and we are the branches. I've heard it said that, and Beth will attest to this because she has a nasty vine in her garden, that a weed is the plant that grows where you don't want it, right? Then it becomes a weed. And I'm sure we've all yanked out our share of vines that grow like weeds and invade our gardens. I know there's a lot of mint in the garden that we weren't meant to. That's PDP. But what is so unique about vines that Jesus chose this word picture for us in understanding our relationship to him? Well, Wikipedia says that vines grow and climb and creep and sprawl, spreading out horizontally and mounting vertically. They are incapable of supporting their own weight. Thus, they have this remarkable resistance to pulling and breaking. Probably what makes them so tenacious in our garden. In order to remain upright, vines shoot out these little tendrils that seek objects to attach to. These tendril shoots respond to a daily circadian rhythm. And when viewed through a high digital time-lapse lens, they look as if they're tossing a little lasso, sensing the pressure of a potential source of support and attaching to it. Once the stem is secured, then leaf growth begins. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, as lovely of a comparison as it seems to be, Jesus was aware of another use for this image of a vine. It comes from the ancient texts of his faith. In Hebrew tradition, images are often used as a representation of something that literary tools called a mashal. In the Jewish writings of antiquity, the mashal of a vine is used to represent God's relationship to a group of people or a person. In several passages of the Old Testament, Israel is the vine, and God is the master gardener, and tends the vine and trims it as needed. Remember that last week we recognized that when we put in context our readings regarding good shepherds and sheep, it was about a new social order where the most vulnerable were attended to. Here we see Jesus turning our focus to the nation of Israel, God's relationship to his chosen people. In Psalm 80, the writer says, "You, God, brought a vine out of Egypt. You drove out the nations and planted it. You cleared the ground for it. It took deep root and filled the land." Israel is to God a vine clipping taken from Egypt and planted in the land of Canaan. I'd never thought about this before, but Israel existed in Egypt for 400 years as a minority group. They were culturally, historically, artistically, and to a great extent linguistically Egyptian. What we might call today the Sephardic Jews of northern Africa. But then Jesus snipped them out and transplanted them into Canaan and made them the object of his special care and attention. And they flourished. The psalmist says, "The mountains were covered with the vine's shade, the mighty cedars with its branches. It sent out its branches to the sea and its shoots to the river." But then something changed. God withdrew his protection, and the vine was trampled on by other nations. Isaiah the prophet tells us why. "What more was there to do for my vineyard that I have not done in it? When I looked for it to grow grapes, it did not." Despite all of God's generosity and care, the people of Israel did not yield to him the fruit that he desired. They lost their way, they lost their connection to God, God who had a special covenant love for the people of Israel. Thomas Keating says, "The chief thing that separates us from God is the thought that we are separated from God." And so God sent his Son, fully human and fully divine, one with God, to show us not only our own oneness with God, but also for us to see that divinity in one another. Psalm 80 says, "Turn again, O God of hosts, look down from the heaven and see. Have regard for this vine, the son whom you have made strong for yourself." And that's the backstory behind Jesus' statement, "I am the true vine, and you are the branches, and my Father is the vine grower." Before we look at what that might mean in our lives, I want to talk about another area regarding language. When Jesus says he is the true vine, where does your mind go? Like, what's the false vine, right? Because we have this kind of binary way of thinking. How tempting in our contemporary culture to say us against them. We want to say that we belong to the true vine, while others, well, they're just simply false. What I discovered as I dug a little deeper is meaning lost in translation. In both Latin and Greek, the idea of something being true refers to the essence of it, and not whether it is right or wrong. It's an adjective, not an adverb. For instance, we might say that the sky is true blue, or that that was one true cup of coffee. In this case, and as it is often used in John, true means that something is of divine origin, something is in essence divine. Jesus talks in John about being the true light, the true bread, the true judgment. Here he is the true Israel, the real deal. The Israel in the essence intended by God, one with the Father, faithful, obedient to the end. One who lives and breathes the essence of God, the essence of love, for God is true love. Paul went through a bit of a test on whether or not he was a true follower of Jesus. You can't blame the disciples too much for being a little bit afraid of Paul. Paul, a Greek-speaking Jew from Asia Minor, lived as a Pharisee and participated in the persecution of not only the early disciples of Jesus, but the execution of Stephen just a short while before. Paul, who had never met Jesus prior to his death, had an encounter with him while traveling on the road to Damascus. Paul was on his way to hunt down and capture followers of Christ, to take them to Jerusalem. And a bright light shone, and the voice of Christ asked Paul, "Why are you persecuting them?" Paul had a mystical experience that temporarily blinded him. 3 days later, he was healed and baptized and immediately began preaching to everyone that Jesus was the Jewish Messiah and the Son of God. Paul's experience was mystical and transformative. We, like the apostles and the early disciples, might be tempted to close in our ranks. Let's say if someone from the nuncio's office suddenly showed up in our driveway here at Beloved. But what the early Christians learned from Paul is that we are all of the essence of the true vine, all of us. One vine and many branches. What does it mean for you and me to be a part of the vine? How do we keep growing good fruit in our lives? What is it like to experience the pruning shears of the vine grower? Perhaps there isn't much for us to do, but simply for us to be, or better put, to interbe. The vine and the branches are one plant. The branches are simply the vine growing out. Meister Eckhart says, "The eye through which I see God is the same eye through which God sees me. My eye and God's eye are one eye, one seeing, one knowing, one love." Similar to the mystical presence of Jesus in the Eucharist, we are a part of the mystical body of Christ. And so the energy that flows from God into Jesus flows through us. St. Hildegard would call that veritas. However, when the energy is blocked, a vine begins to wither. We have a tree in our yard that needed a little help this spring. It's a beautiful maple that we planted last year. I tell JP all the time the tree kind of resembles him. It was a bit bare on top. The leaves didn't grow. So there was something blocking that flow of energy, preventing it from getting to the top of the tree, through the roots, up the trunk, and through the branches to the leaves. And so it required a little bit of pruning so that the flow of energy could sustain the life of the tree. Remember the tendrils on the vine that shoot out seeking an object to attach to. Our attachments can prevent the flow of energy that allows us to simply be in a state of interdependence with divinity. Attachments divert our gaze. They create anxiety, suggesting that we need what we're attached to in order to be fully supported, that the vine isn't sufficient enough. How do we know if we are blocked? Some of us are internal gazers of our energy flow. We might meditate and release our attachments until we are also released into oneness with divinity. Others of us are more conditioned to participate in the divine energy field around us, the warmth of the sun, the ways in which the trees dance, the singing of birds, the rippling of a brook. When we can't join the biorhythm of nature, we might be blocked. And so we have to reflect a bit to see what has our attention diverted. Can you feel it when you are blocked? Do you find yourself perseverating and unable to move forward, unable to flow? We don't need to wait for the vine grower to come with those large shears. When energy ceases to flow, naming that place where we are stuck is a good first start. Hold it out there. Look at it. Try and understand the need that prompts you to cling like the tendrils on a vine to whatever it is. The more we understand our attachments and where they come from, the easier it is to let go of them. Remember that the breath of God awakens life in all creation and not anything that we do. Our task is simply to become conscious of that breath and to be in it. Father Keating, a Trappist monk who many of you know as one of the fathers of centering prayer, says, "We rarely think of the air we breathe, yet it is in us and around us all the time. In a similar fashion, the presence of God penetrates us. It's all around us, always embracing us. We will observe that awakened spirit breath consciousness as it emerges again at Pentecost with a gale force. As with Paul, it was a sudden presence. Jesus' friends experienced the ecstasy of oneness with God in an exhilarating way. Paul Smith, who writes about integral Christianity and the mystical experience, says, more commonly, an experience like this occurs gradually and can range from a gentle breeze to gusts of awakening. There are many different degrees of intensity, concentration, and conviction in the oneness experiences of individuals molded by both God and our consciences. The most striking effect of the experience of oneness is not new knowledge or concepts. Instead, it is a newfound spiritual energy, a greater spiritual vision. We are raised to a whole new level of spiritual life. Jesus' prayer for us is this: may they all be one, as you, Abba God, are in me, and I am in you. May they also be in us. Amen.